Hi guys, what is going on, and welcome back to another video on Conquerors Blade. So today we are going to be having a look at the two new units we've got coming in Season 12. Starting off, of course, with the Varangian Guard, or the upgraded version as they're called, the King's Shields. What an epic looking unit. These guys do look really fantastic. I really like these sort of multicoloured brigandine thing they've got going on. So yeah, really kind of a badass looking unit. But they've got some really interesting abilities. I know I say it all the time, but what an interesting unit they really are. And actually, very good, at least from the testing so far. So, kind of how does it work? In many ways, they're sort of like a hybrid between Shield Maidens and Berserkers. So they employ a rage mechanic. So they start off with swords and shields, and you can basically move them around as just a small melee unit. Or you can all use Unbreakable. And Unbreakable, basically, they lock down, they hunker down, they hold the shields up, which gives them reduced movement speed and reduced attack speed, but does reduce incoming damage. And after a successful block, they get even more damage reduction. So it makes them kind of fairly tanky. But because they have this unit trait in attack and defense, whilst wielding swords, or even swords, the unit can build up rage by taking damage and defeating heroes. When their rage then gets to full, so you have to get to full rage, you can then switch to two-handed axes, which gives them a base increase in AP and damage, and then you can go through a chain of 3 abilities. Now this has to go in order. You can't just use any one of them at any moment of time. Once you activate your axes, the next one is the Great Sweep, which they basically do sort of an AoE sweep. But the key things, and this is key throughout, 2-second CC immunity, and if they've got less than half their health, they get a 20% health boost and a 50% damage increase. Same thing again, Colossal Strike, 2-second CC, 50% damage boost, 20% healing, and it causes knockdown. And then we go on to the third ability, and you can trigger these all within the 6 seconds, so you can keep the CC up the entire time. And again, 50% damage boost, 20% health reduction, also causes knockdown. And then that uses the last bit of your rage, and so that sends you back on into sword and shield mode. But by then, pretty much everything is completely dead. Now, I've been running down this middle line. I think actually I would probably, if I was to do it again, I'd reset this so that you get the double strike on the bottom, because you should actually be able to get all the way down to this final node here. But going top and middle so far seems to make them really quite tanky, and in my testing with King Alpha, it seems like this is kind of the way to go, really. Seems to be the most effective. I am running them with some sort of basic doctrines. They do class, even though the melee infantry special, they class as a sword unit. So you can put a sword doctrine and a Ironsides doctrine on them, which is nice that you're able to do that. Obviously, you can't use the sword cooldown or the sword charge doctrine because, well, they don't charge. So that obviously makes sense. So let's hop into some clips with them and see what we can do. So we kick things off with some Iron Reapers, an equivalent tier 5 golden era infantry unit. I've got the unit in the sword formation, braced, no rage, but as soon as the Iron Reapers hit, they do so much damage potential, I almost get instant rage. I go straight on with my axes, get that immediate CC immunity, and the entire unit of Iron Reapers is wiped out in like 2 seconds. That CC immunity, you'll notice, managed to get the whole unit to stand immediately back up and go on the offensive. Against a unit of Palace Guards, I have lost a couple of the unit already, but they push in, brace into me. You see, I quickly get my rage up. I'm a little bit slow to activate it. You see, it is actually quite effective at cutting through. We do take some damage here, and I'm maybe a little slow in switching between my Varangian abilities. And then, unfortunately, we go through the final ability, which then puts me down. But the rage is actually back up, so I should activate again straight away. And then we can push through and we can just finish them off. But we do end up taking a few casualties there. I think with a little bit better timing, we may be able to do that a little bit better though. After that, I wanted to test out some Imperial Pike Guards against the Varangians. Can they withstand a pike walk? Yes. Yes, they can. It doesn't really affect them at all. And then, of course, remember, this time they're building up rage. And then as soon as they're going to switch to their axes and they activate their ability, they get 2 seconds CC immunity. So they just cut through quite easily through the pike walk. I mean, King Alpha here is barely even really controlling the unit particularly effectively. He's just sort of messing around, and it shows how effective they are still against these Imperial Pikemen. Imperial Pike, yeah, their advance is not going to be going through these Varangian Guard. Next up, we wanted to try Claymores, a unit that can defeat Iron Reapers. They charge in, I've just got them braced initially. As soon as my rage builds up, I'm going on with my axes, going on with my abilities. I could almost have been as well waiting a bit longer in the shield formation because it just blocks so much damage. They do start to make a bit of impact. I got a little bit too close and got slightly involved in the fight unintentionally. We did slightly kill one Claymore there, but I don't think it changed the outcome of the fight significantly. You can see we do manage to carry it through, but actually the unit did have a fairly hard time. Claymores proving their worth. Of course, I had to give 4 to Brashos a little go, and as I'm sure you can imagine, it goes about as well for the 40s as you'd imagine. Once they're embraced, they actually can't hit through the block, and then as they switch to the Axis, of course, they get CC immunity, so they can just cut through these 4 to Brashos, really without too much of a problem. And remember, as soon as their health starts to go down, every time they activate an ability, they get plus 20% health recovery, so yeah. I did want to try a little bit with the Sealadars, and actually I found that when I'm controlling the Sealadars, I was able to get them to cut through. I was just using my hero to push them in with Cover Commander, but they do take casualties, and it is quite a tough fight, but we're actually able to get a good, decent push through there. But this is against Alpha's Varangians on the bottom veterancy line. Whereas if we then compare that to my Varangians, which are on the top and the middle veterancy line, we found that they actually tended to be quite a bit more effective. It's still a very tough fight, but you can see that the health at the bottom sort of bouncing up and down as I'm activating abilities. I'm trying to sort of time it so as the health get low, I'm activating an ability to give them that 50% extra damage and that 20% health recovery. And it does sort of work, and we do actually manage to get through and eventually take the win. But it does cost us the bulk of the unit. In terms of veterancy lines, there are kind of a few options open to you. We kind of found that the best was going along the top line. It gives you quite a lot of extra tankiness, particularly things like this extra 10% melee damage reduction is pretty significant. You can then actually get pretty far along the middle veterancy line. In this case, I just left it here, but actually it would make a lot more sense. You can actually get down fully to the end, which is going to basically give you an extra double strike, or at least hit through, on their AoE abilities, which seems kind of worth having over the slight increase from block break and charge damage. So you can actually do pretty well down here. You could also look and go down the bottom veterancy line, which also gives you some resistances, which I think is kind of nice. But yeah, this extra 10% seemed to make a real difference to how they performed. But obviously, 1, we're on the PTR, 2, we're only done, a handful of battles. We can only get so much testing in one evening and still get a video recorded. So there's a lot of combinations still to test out here, given the different veterancy lines. The only thing worth pointing out is that this is a 16-man unit with almost 17,500 hit points when they're maxed out. It's like a double stack of Berserkers in terms of total hit point pool. Next up, we have the Huskals, the tier 4 sword and shield unit. Kind of an interesting unit. They play almost, I don't know what to describe them, almost like a tier 4 version of Condos. They're like this really aggressive shock attack type unit. But they also have a fairly interesting selection of mechanics. As you can see from the unit orders, it's fairly lengthy. So they have this boar snout, which is basically a form of cover commander. They form up in front of you, and as you walk forwards, they walk forwards with you. Now, after that, you're then going to get Scald's Song. Okay, what does this do? So when you activate this, it basically is almost like building up the rage mechanics of the Varangians. But it builds up in 3 tiers, and for each tier, you unlock a different ability. So once you get to tier 1, you get the Gathering Storm, Sea Surge at tier 2, and then Huskals Charge at tier 3. And it takes sort of 5 to 6 seconds to go from 0 right up to the top. Then when you get up to the top, the only ability then that will give you, as with the Varangians, is 1 at a time. It will give you the Huskals Charge. You can then launch a pretty effective charge at enemy units. Then once that tier runs out, you're then able to activate the Sea Surge, and then you're able to activate the Gathering Storm at the bottom. So you can basically work your way through the 3 abilities as it cools down. But unlike the Varangians though, this does decline. So if you take this up to tier 3, then you stop the song and wander away, then it will just decline down fairly rapidly, unlike the Rage with the Varangians, which stays full, until you utilise it. As before, I'm going along the top line down here, mostly about extra damage and stuff like that. It does have a bit that can trigger a bleed effect on the 4th hit, and then we get a little bit of the middle line as well. But either line, I think, probably could be viable on this one. I'm running them with a couple of doctrines. Again, they do take the sword doctrines, but again, even though they technically kind of have that charge, it's not a charge where you angle which way they go. It's like a berserker auto charge, so they don't get any of the sword charge doctrines that work with them. So that's not really an option there. In terms of stats, 21 models in the unit, just over 12,000 hit points each. And actually not that untanky, over 600 defense on each. And you see that pretty nice slashing defense and almost 1600 slashing AP, which means they do quite a good chunk of damage. But anyway, let's hop into some battles with them. Initially wanted to test them out against some palace guards. We both charge each other. As we impact, I go on my iron sides, go for the brace. Yeah. The Huskals charge is far superior, and then they get their follow-up abilities, which really just cut through the balance of the unit, without me really able to do really any significant damage at all to the enemy Huskals. Next up, we wanted to test against the Greyhair Garrison. Actually, I've left in the full rage building clip so you can see how long they take to build up to tier 3 and kind of how the mechanic works. It's actually kind of cool, it is quite a nice animation. And then it builds up, and then I press the charge and they go in. And initially it's a really effective slam straight in, picks up plenty of kills. I activate my iron sides, not till it goes to tier 2 do you get the second 1 ability to press. Don't know why the AI is a little bit funky. 4 of the units actually just run out of the fight rather than staying in. As I then go on with the third ability, the unit goes a little bit funky. They don't seem to have the greatest AI, but the damage there is definitely significant. We were actually kind of surprised about that result, so we wanted to test it a second time. We build it up, we go for the charge in, and actually it turns out to be kind of a similar result. The Greyhairs do a much better job this time around, but still ultimately they end up in the same fate. Now one thing you will notice if you spotted right at the start of that clip is that until that tier 3 bar drains down to 0 after the charge, you can't follow up with your second ability. So it's almost worth not completely overcharging that third charge. You just want enough to get you to the enemy. As you can imagine, 40 did not fare very well. They might have got a kill or two in that initial charge, but it wasn't enough to actually stun the enemy and stop them from getting to them, and then they hit them with the charge and they basically insta-kill them. Very similar situation to the Azaps. 2/3 of the unit gets wiped out on the charge, they lose badly. Then try and get on with a little bit of counter strikes, but you know, it's far too late by that point to really do anything. One really interesting result was against Claymores. The Huskals charge in, they got a good amount of hit on the impact, actually kill 1 or 2 models with the charge, but then the Claymores get their massive damage reduction. And actually, the time they use their AoE, they wipe out the Huskals pretty convincingly. So Claymores proving to be the meta unit of the hour at the moment, at least against the new units. For the veterancy line on these Huskals, I've just got them left on what they were standard as. King Alpha moved his around, but basically along the top line is increased damage. We're increasing slashing AP, which is part of the reason their slashing AP is so high, pushing this sort of magical 1600 figure, which is where you sort of really start to exacerbate it. You also get some extra slashing damage, a slightly strange one with this increased damage to pikemen, as well as some cooldowns and bits, a little bit of extra, before we get onto this razor sharp thing at the end, which basically if you land 4 attacks you get a bit of a bleed effect on the target. I'd slightly question how effective that reasonably is. How often are you going to be able to land 4 attacks on one unit before they're dead anyway? Certainly going to be almost dead by the end of that. I suppose it adds a little something, but perhaps isn't that easy to get to trigger. On the middle veterancy line, we have slightly more resistances. Increased blocking points, resistance to ranged weapons, exacta, bit of extra slashing defense, stuff like that. Before you basically get a stun ability. It stacks up to 9% slow, and then on the 4th hit provides a stun. So it's kind of a derivative of this one over here in the same way. And then on the bottom line, you get this slight health restoration. Could be interesting, but it's only going to give you 10% health back in total. And I questioned if it was really worth it. It's not the most rapid healing ever. I suppose it could be good. Certainly got some potential there. I just don't know if it would be easier by the time you've done all that for the length of time just to send them back to the supply point and come back, because they do have pretty fast movement speed. But there we go, a couple of viable options on the Huskal veterancy line as well. Again, tried to test out some of the different ones with King Alpha. So many variations and combinations that it's just not really possible to test against each unit and how each line performs in the time we've got available. But anyway, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. Now, of course, these tests are by no means extensive. There are so many different veterancy line variations. I didn't even get on to testing cavalry, so we don't really know how they fare against the Varangians. I think it's fairly safe to say the Huskals probably aren't going to fare particularly well against them. But yeah, there's a lot of other combinations and different ways in which we can test these. And of course, this is the PTR, so things are likely to change before they actually get implemented into the game. But it does give us a little bit of an initial idea of what the units are going to be like. Both seem very good units from what we've seen so far. The Varangians seem particularly nice. I wouldn't be surprised if they got a small nerf or an adjustment before they actually got released, because they do seem pretty powerful. But anyway, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel, ask any questions you have about new units down below, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.